Stories: Robert Mueller under fire. The judge in the Manafort case repeatedly rebuking Mueller's legal team of angry Democratic prosecutors, while President Trump calls for an end to the witch hunt. The phony Russia investigation may finally have hit a wall. We'll talk about it tonight. Republican strategist Ed Rollins with us. Also, President Trump turning up the heat on China. He's calling for a boost from 10 to 25% for $200 billion worth of Chinese imports to this country. The Trump administration fighting hard for American workers, the middle class, in the face of steep opposition from the Dems, the radical rhinos, and the Business Roundtable, the Chamber of Commerce, and the president's good friends, the Koch brothers. I'm being facetious, of course. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross with us tonight. And the national left-wing media that spreads lies and disinformation about the president while stoking the outrage of those radical Dems and the violent thugs and the so-called resistance, suddenly whining loudly about how they're being treated at Trump rallies. We'll talk about the fake news hypocrisy with our panel tonight. Candace Owens from Turning Point USA and the Daily Caller's Vince Colonnese. And our top story: Fox News has learned that special counsel Robert Mueller will not agree to an interview with the president, restricted only to questions about the Russian collusion, which, by the way, is the reason he exists as a special counsel, period. In a letter to the president's attorneys, Mueller says he still wants to talk about obstruction and other topics as well. It's not looking good for a sit-down with the president. Day 2 in the trial of former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and the presiding judge, T.S. Ellis. T.S. Ellis, the third, repeatedly rebuked the Mueller team's prosecuting attorneys after Ellis admonished the prosecution Tuesday for using the term oligarchs to describe Manafort's Ukrainian connections. He reminded jurors, did the judge, that Manafort's spending was irrelevant. He warned the prosecution not to roll their eyes at him. How about that? That's a classy move, isn't it? Wouldn't that be something you'd like to see from an attorney or a prosecutor in a courtroom? Class acts. The judge has stated that he hopes to finish the trial much sooner than the anticipated 3 weeks. Joining us tonight, Ed Rollins, former Reagan White House political director, Great America PAC chairman, Hall of Fame political consultant and strategist, and Fox Business political analyst. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Let's start with this thing. A federal district court judge has to talk to a team of attorneys from the special counsel like they're sixth graders, for crying out loud.
Well, you know, sometimes you can bring way too much evidence, and they've been spending a lot of time gathering it. If they have the goods on Paul Manafort, who I know well and have known Paul to be a reputable guy and a guy who is very detail-oriented. So, you know, if you have the evidence, move it forward. If not, you know, you don't have to bring pictures of suits and all the things that they're doing. Make your case and move on. I
got to say to you straight up, I mean, they're just being ignorant. I mean, to have a special counsel, a team of attorneys who don't know how to behave in a courtroom, acting like the fools they have, initially at least in this case, is extraordinary.
Well, it is extraordinary, and they got a very tough judge. This is a very good judge. He's been on the bench a long time.
Well, thank goodness. I mean, who wants an idiot performing like the lead counsel for the special counsel?
Totally agree. And again, I don't know any more about the evidence than what I've read in the paper. I've known Paul a long time.
Well, there isn't any evidence so far.
Well, I don't know what's there. And at the end of the day,
we do know one thing. We know Tad Devine, the architect of Bernie Sanders' campaign, who worked with Manafort in the Ukraine, is apparently no longer going to roll over for the government or be the government's first witness. We know that. He had been planned to be. He apparently is gone.
Well, I don't know anything more than what I've read and heard, and I'm not going to argue the merits of it one way or the other.
I don't want you to argue. I want you to agree. Who the hell wants to argue?
I don't want to argue. Paul worked for me in 1984, and he's.
Did you get some of that $60 million?
No, I did not get any of that $60 million. All I can tell you, though, is he got $60 million and he didn't pay taxes.
I thought you didn't want to talk about evidence.
I'm making a premise. I'm amazed he made $60 million. The interesting thing, but you don't know, Paul was the other candidate to run Reagan's campaign in 1984. He was Jim Baker's candidate. Right. I got picked by the president, right. Paul Laxalt, and what have you. So Paul ran the convention delegates for me and did a very good job. He'd been around the game a long time. He made a lot more money than the vast majority of people, which tells me he's probably a lot smarter than the rest of us. So, but we'll let the merits.
Well, as you well know, you can't always judge a man or a woman's intellect by the amount of money they make.
Thank God, because I haven't made much money, as my wife will tell you over and over again.
Say that again.
I haven't made much money. It was my wife keeps saying, Paul made $60 million. Why? You were in the same business. What's happened to you?
Well. That's another reason we all need an understanding wife, right?
Yes.
Anyway, let's turn to this Mueller probe. The president tweeting out to his attorney general that he should end this travesty, the Mueller witch hunt. And then you hear the clucking little nasty voices from the left in media. Having a fit because the president is ordered, they said. He said should. The nominative is in play here, folks. It's a hypothetical. Get real.
You and I aren't the president, but we've been saying this for about 3 months now.
Wait a minute. What do you mean we're not the president? You mean I'm a host of a TV show?
You may speak to the president nightly and more often than that, but the bottom line here is we've all argued very strenuously that what we have seen publicly and what we know privately is there's no there. And I think at the end of the day, if he has anything, he needs to put it forth. He can't go on forever. And the president's right.
Well, the hell he can't. Well, let's examine that, because we keep hearing this nonsense to me, not your nonsense, but the nonsense from these, these talking heads. They're saying, well, we've just got to play this out to the finish. We've just got to let it resolve. We've got to let Bob Mueller do whatever the heck he chooses. We've got to wait for the, we're into year 3 of the investigation into President Trump on Russian collusion. And somebody needs to have the judgment to say to Mueller, it's done. And we're not going to wait for the midterms. You've had enough time he's had enough time to build an original aircraft. What in the world is going on here?
Well, I had very, very bad memories of Walsh when he was the special prosecutor. Ron Conte, on for 7-8 years, and at the end of the day, made bad charges and not.
Do you remember when they released that report?
It was in the next administration.
Yeah, it was the Friday before Election Day.
No, absolutely. Indicted Cap Weinberger for nothing. That they basically had to throw it. The key thing is the president should not testify. He was exactly right sending his tweet out today and telling Sessions to do your job for once and get in there and look at this thing. And if there's no there, shut it down.
Yeah, it's a mess, and I just can't understand why people don't look at history and say, we're not going to repeat the disasters that have been the special counsel.
Well, the Congress eliminated the special counsel because Walsh and them all went on too long. So now this
went on too long, didn't do anything, and were dishonest in what they did do.
And now they're acting on the power. This guy's acting on the power of the Attorney General.
Mueller is seizing on that as precedent for his own behavior.
And the Attorney General ought to shut it down.
Yeah, absolutely. You think there's any chance that we could see Jeff Sessions gain consciousness long enough and conscience long enough to shut it down?
No, I don't. But I wish you would. So it's the whole.
So what does the president do if Sessions doesn't?
I think at the end of the day here he's got to fire Sessions.
Well, I think that the only way you can improve it is make it the first part of the day.
Right.
So we'll see.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Ed Rollins. The national left-wing national media outdoing even the radical Dems in their hysterical response to the president's tweet expressing his view that Attorney General Sessions should end the Mueller witch hunt. Watch this.
The president doesn't see this as interference. He sees it as he can do whatever he wants.
Trump does appear to be testing the boundaries here.
This is a potential third rail. Maybe this is the beginning of a new Saturday night massacre.
I think the president should be concerned that he's in deep trouble because it looks like he is.
I don't think it's necessarily the court of law where this will sort out. It's going to be within the politics of impeachment.
The AG, the deputy AG, the FBI director, they're all more or less ignoring what the president is saying, and they're just doing their jobs.
Folks, you don't want to know the answer, but if we were to do an average there on IQ, and integrity, I'm not sure that we'd need double digits. Also tonight, the latest on the trade fight with China. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is joining us here tonight. He is next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Our top story tonight, President Trump proposing an increase in tariffs on Chinese imports into this country from 10 to 25%. The U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer released a statement saying in part this, quote, "The Trump administration continues to urge China to stop its unfair practices, to open its market, to engage in a true market competition. Regrettably, instead of changing its harmful behavior, China has illegally retaliated against U.S. workers, farmers, ranchers, and businesses." Chinese officials responded to the proposed increase, calling it, quote, blackmail, and saying they would respond with retaliatory measures. Joining us tonight to give us some inside views from the administration's perspective, the U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. Mr. Secretary, great to have you with us.
Good to be on.
Increasing the tariffs. The Chinese have been recalcitrant. They obviously have not been forthcoming in reducing barriers, both trade barriers as well as specifically limitations on U.S. exports. What choice does the administration have here but to raise tariffs and to make them, if you will, feel it?
We really have to do it, Lou. The president ultimately wants less tariffs, less non-tariff trade barriers, level playing field, no subsidies, the whole 9 yards. But to get there, we have to make it more painful for them to continue these bad practices than to modify them. That's what this is all about.
And at what point do you think that the Chinese are going to come to their senses and understand, because they have been spoiled, as the president has noted, by previous administrations who rolled over for anything the Chinese wanted? There has been no prosecution of the Chinese espionage front companies in this country, stealing everything from technology to trade secrets, some $600 billion in intellectual property every year.
Right.
In addition to the trade surpluses they've been running against this country from the moment they entered the WTO almost 2 decades ago.
Well, you have to go back to that very date when they came in. The idea of bringing them in on the theory that they would now play by the rules was a terribly flawed theory. And the foolishness was not to have a real enforcement mechanism in case the theory proved untrue, as it has proven to be. That was the double flaw in what was done then. But because it's gone on for so long, it's going to take a lot of effort to make them reconsider what they're doing. They know very well what they're doing. There's no intellectual problem. It's just we need to give them enough motivation to fly right.
And fly right is something that is not obviously either comprehended and not respected or acknowledged by the national left-wing media, who seem to be incapable of doing basic mathematics. But for that matter, so are the Koch brothers challenged, particularly Charles Koch, the head of Koch Industries, attacking the president, the administration's tariffs, saying that they're ridiculous, saying that they harm. He's not concerned about harming American workers and the middle class and businesses. He's worried about foreign workers and foreigners. I mean, the preposterous nature of what the Koch Industries and the Koch brothers are doing here in attacking with $400 million Republican candidates because they want open borders, free illegal immigration, and they don't mind if the Chinese take $600 billion in American intellectual property. It is the darndest thing I can imagine having to deal with from your perspective.
Well, the left-wing press doesn't get it. They don't want to get it. But I'll tell you who does get it: the average American citizen, the average American worker. And even the American farmers who've been singled out for some of the retaliation, our farmers, our workers are real patriots. I was traveling with the president last week in Iowa and Illinois, and the enthusiasm of the crowds was even greater than it was during the campaign. During the entire time that we were at the reopening of the big U.S. Steel plant in Illinois, every single person in the audience stood the whole time. It was amazing to see the reaction, the emotional reaction. You know, the worker who just got a bigger paycheck because of lower withholding, the worker who just got a job back, the worker who just got a bonus, he knows.
Mr. Secretary, I think you're exactly right. I also think that the elitist global orthodoxy on Capitol Hill, and I'm talking about the bought and paid for Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate, they're not used to having to deal with a president who actually means, as he said in the campaign, to lift all American workers. And what the result has been just extraordinary. Low unemployment rate, record low unemployment rates for minorities in this country, a prosperity that it's remarkable in and of itself. If it had been at the end of his first term, or even at the end of his second, some would argue. But to have it happen in a year and a half, this president is proving who he is and what his leadership does mean to Americans of throughout our society.
He does, and if all politicians would keep their promises, the world would be a much safer place.
Right.
President takes those promises as real commitments, and there isn't a single one that he has blinked on, despite all the backwash from the left wing. I think what's really driving the left wing nuts is that it's working. Remember, they were all saying, oh, Trump's policies will bring gloom and doom. Yeah. He'll provoke a depression.
You don't hear from Paul Krugman very often these days, do you?
Well, or Larry Summers or any of them.
Well, and by the way, and for that alone, we're deeply in your debt and debt to the president. We appreciate it. Mr. Secretary, keep up the great work. We appreciate it mightily. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lou. We're going to win this.
Amen. Thank you so much. Wilbur Ross, Commerce Secretary. Be sure to vote in our poll tonight. The question is, do you believe the Koch brothers' globalist, anti-American worker policies will boost mainstream Republicans and conservatives and undercut the rhinos and radical Dems in the midterms? Cast your vote at Twitter, on Twitter, and Lou Dobbs. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs tonight. Still ahead here tonight, radical Dem Congresswoman Maxine Waters may be in hot water with the Federal Election Commission. Charges of possible fundraising violations and more. We'll take that up next. Much more straight ahead. Stay with us. The Senate Intel Committee offering no new results after a hearing on foreign influence operations and use of social media. Chairman Richard Burr and Vice Chairman Mark Warner issued this statement saying, quote, "Today we learned that foreign campaigns to sow discord and disinformation through social media began well before the 2016 elections and continue to this day." Now, over a year of investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and that is what they are revealing to us all. It's certainly been worthwhile in terms of resources and money expended, don't you think? Well, joining us now, John Hanna, Senior Counselor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, former National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Good to have you with us, John.
Hi, Lou.
Are you stunned by the conclusion of Messrs. Burr and Warner?
I don't think so. I mean, this is something the Soviets before the Russians and the Russians now have been at for several decades, trying to muck about in American elections. So I hardly think that's worth the time and resources to come to that conclusion.
Does it astound you that Burr and Warner, the ranking Democrat, the chairman, the Republican chairman, actually acted like they didn't know that Russia had been trying to intervene in elections for decades before 2016?
Indeed. It was a Casablanca moment. Shocked that there's Russian efforts to meddle in the American democratic process.
So what we have got now is a Senate Intelligence Committee that has made no findings, that has no evidence of collusion, says that they know that the Russians meddled in our elections, but don't spell out exactly how, what the result was. There's been no straight line drawn in any of it. I have no doubt the Russians meddled in the elections, but I would like to know one thing that no one talks about, and it's sort of curious to me that no one, and I mean no one, on Capitol Hill talks about, and that is, so the Russians intervened in the 26th election. Where in the world were our 16 intelligence agencies and James Clapper, the NDI? Where in the world were the CIA, the FBI? They didn't stop anything. They apparently didn't detect it until well after it had occurred. And no one is criticizing a single intelligence agency of this country. And instead, they have created this perverse world in Washington, D.C., where we're expecting congressional and Senate committees to do the work of the agencies and find the evidence of collusion. Because if these agencies were worth a tinker's darn, wouldn't they have known what the collusion was and how it occurred when President Trump was a candidate and as president?
Well, it's certainly the case that I think there was ample evidence to suggest to these agencies and the U.S. government under the Obama administration that there was Russian meddling going on. The question that we all need to grapple with and answer, that people are trying to avoid, is what was done about it, what wasn't done about it, and what can we do better next time to ensure that we don't simply repeat the same old mistakes.
Yeah, because right now, we know that as a result of Facebook's revelations this week, we know from Facebook, but 3 months later, 4 months later, that the Russians, maybe, they don't know for sure who did it, and we're not hearing anything from the intelligence agencies, created 32 false pages, phony pages. This is starting to look like the United States is one goofy intelligence operation. And it really should be encouraging, it seems to me, all sorts of bad actors, both state and otherwise, to act against us again and continue to intervene, to meddle, and to rob this country blind.
Yeah, no, that's the great danger, Lou, is that we're being completely distracted from having the president work together with the Congress on a bipartisan basis to actually protect the country against the threats we face, both internally as well as externally, because the challenges remain enormous and we're not really coming together and dealing with those.
Well, you can talk about bipartisanship coming together. Instead, what you have are the Democrats harassing this president, assaulting this president with the special counsel. This investigation has gone on for more than a year. Almost a year by the FBI. So the president has been under investigation for over 2 years and still have produced nothing. Meanwhile, think of all that is taking away from the president's time, that of his advisors, his attorneys. The oversight committees are wrapped up in this nonsensical crusade, jihad, whatever you want to call it. And instead of focusing on the enemy, and by the enemy, I mean Russia, and I mean North Korea, and I mean China, and I mean every actor, state and otherwise, who would seek to damage the United States, whether it's intervening in our elections or stealing our technology, our intellectual property, you name it. What do you think?
Well, I think that's certainly the case. I'd add Iran to that mix and simply say that whatever one thinks about these investigations, there's no doubt that this degree of polarization comes at a huge opportunity cost in terms of doing what is necessary as a nation to protect the American people. And that's a great tragedy.
Yeah. It's a tragedy of our own making, and the Dems are doing the Vladimir Putin's bidding, because they are the ones sowing discord and disinformation and, frankly, lying through their teeth at every turn, along with the deep state. And this president, for too long, and every American should say this out loud and straightforwardly to every congressman and every senator, it's time to end the damn nonsense and start protecting this country. Our intelligence agency apparently spending more time huddling with the deep state about how they can overthrow the president of the United States. Do you agree it's about time to wrap it up?
I'd like to see this get done, like I said, as soon as possible, Lou. I'm a foreign policy, national security guy, and I know that these kinds of distractions are, in fact, hurting the country's ability to deal with the clear and imminent threats that we're now facing as a nation from an array of nation-state actors and non-state actors.
Right. John, thanks so much for being with us. John Hanna, we appreciate it.
Thanks, Lou.
Wildfires continue to rage throughout California. Those fires destroying more than 1,000 homes, threatening many more. Within those fires, one little girl melting hearts. And we'll tell you all about her here next. We'll be right back. One of the leaders of the anti-Trump resistance is, of course, Maxine Waters. She's under fire now following a complaint made to the Federal Election Commission about her long-standing fundraising efforts. The National Legal and Policy Center claiming Waters has reportedly raised tens of thousands of dollars from the Democratic State Central Committee. Boy, doesn't that sound, well, kind of Marxist? Anyway, the State Committee of California, to include Kamala Harris on a fundraising mailer when Harris was a Senate candidate. That's a no-no. The organization claims a third-party payment to Waters violates federal election law, obviously another no-no. The national left-wing media correspondent, CNN's Jim Acosta, whining after being heckled by Trump supporters at the rally in Tampa last night. The massive crowd booing and chanting. There he is, as he tried to broadcast his very important report on live television. And apparently he was triggered somewhat. Triggered. Later on, Acosta blamed President Trump and quote-unquote media for the incident. Acosta tweeted this: "Just a sample of the sad scene we faced at the Trump rally in Tampa. I'm very worried that the hostility whipped up by Trump," that would be President Trump to you, sir, "and some in conservative media will result in somebody getting hurt. We should not treat our fellow Americans this way. The press is not the enemy." Acosta has made a judgment there. It's kind of interesting. Acosta's tweet ignoring the fact that CNN promotes the radical Dem agenda and endlessly attacks President Trump and his supporters. And he's awfully delicate to be in this racket. Very delicate indeed. Joining us now, Candace Owens, Communications Director for Turning Point USA, the Daily Caller's Editorial Director, Vince Colonnese. Great to have you with us, Vince.
Thank you.
Let me start, Candace, with you. Apparently, CNN has a very sensitive White House correspondent. What do you think?
I think it's quite hilarious, and I love that you use the adjective delicate to describe him, when the treatment of how these anchors have treated the American people has been anything but delicate. They've been quite nasty. In fact, I endure attacks from Jake Tapper all the time on my Twitter feed. He's never had so much as a conversation with me, but just knowing that I'm a black woman that happens to support Donald Trump is enough for him to come after me and the organization that I work for, Turning Point USA. This is them basically sowing what they reap is what's going on here. They have treated us deplorably, really, since Hillary's election. They're not satisfied with the fact that the results have been that Donald Trump is in the Oval Office, and that's what we're seeing taking place. The American people is responding to the way that CNN has treated them.
You know, Candace, I couldn't agree with you more. And Vince, I mean, if Acosta's one of those guys who seems if he weren't whining, he wouldn't be saying anything at all.
Well, he loves this. The spotlight's on Jim Acosta. This is increasing the number of Twitter followers he has, and that's really what it's all about. So, you know, one of the things he put out was this notion that he can't believe, you know, he remembers when we were all on the same team. He had Trump supporters asking him, why aren't you on our team? And he's like, he's lamenting the disunity. But, of course, he's played a massive role in that disunity. And instead of being introspective, instead of thinking, well, what is the problem here? Why is there a trust deficit with CNN? He thinks to himself, well, all of these people must be deficient. There must be something wrong with them that they don't like me. When they're standing there chanting CNN sucks, first of all, I'm kind of nodding in agreement because that's like sort of an obvious point. And the other thing is that he's making the case that this is somehow a threat to the First Amendment, that somehow they're impeding on his ability to be a member of the free press. Yeah. They're not, actually. They're joining the chorus. This is a symphony, brother. You're standing there trying to give your report, and meanwhile, in the background, the American people, in this case, Trump supporters, are adding some color to the actual news that you're supposed to be presenting. That's a news camera, baby, and it's picking up news. They think you suck.
Well, and, you know, it is interesting that the national left-wing media in particular, you know, they will be the first to say, well, we have to ignore the consequences. We have to attack the president no matter what, as if they were on, you know, I don't know what they're thinking, other than ideologically. And suddenly they get a response from the audience, and those people, whether Trump supporters or otherwise, are part of the audience, Candace. And they're giving them immediate feedback that they do not appreciate the left-wing media tearing up the president every day in every way they can.
That's exactly right. Let's just think about how CNN has portrayed Trump supporters as racists, as sexist, as misogynist, you name it. We have seen every single name on their network that they are essentially standing behind a man that they like to liken to Hitler. They love to make comparisons that Donald Trump is literally Hitler. And they're shocked to see this reaction. They're shocked to see that the American people no longer stands on their side, if they ever stood on their side. You know, CNN has had an era of elitism, looking down, sticking their nose down to the American people. And what you said is exactly right. They have no curiosity. They don't want to learn about the American people. They don't want to learn how they're feeling, how the rest of America, you know, all of that land in between New York and LA is feeling. And this is the direct result of that.
And as we wrap up here, Vince, I mean, President Obama, former President Obama, coming out with his list of 88 endorsements that he is handing out. Right. And I'm just thinking how thrilled that, you know, frankly, Ronna McDaniel must be over the RNC, because here's his record during his 8 years in office. If we could put that up on the full screen, here is the Obama legacy. 63 Dems lost House seats, 10 Dems lost Senate seats, 900 Republicans gained seats in state legislatures across the country. And 12 Republicans gained gubernatorial offices. Yeah. I got to believe that Ronna McDaniel is pretty thrilled right now with the Obama endorsements.
And not exactly the Midas touch, is it, Lou? No, everything Obama's touched in terms of the Democratic Party hasn't succeeded. It's kind of the weird paradox. And Democrats, if you get them just like 2 drinks in, they'll start to admit this. That's a reality. They realize, look, Obama helped himself. President Obama was very good for himself in terms of his political future. Sure. Not so good for the Democratic Party, yet everywhere I see in the press today, they're all very excited about his picks. I don't know why, given his history.
Yeah, well, let's see if history repeats itself, or is it continues anyway. Candace Owens, thank you so much. Vince Colonnese, thank you so much. Appreciate both of you being here. Up next, Judge Janine, Greg Jarrett, Sebastian Gorka, Sidney Powell. They all get along fine on our show. But tonight, only one can be number one, at least at a time. We'll have the story for you right after the break. That's quite a force. That's a foursome right there. Powerful. We'll have the story for you next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. On Wall Street, stocks closing mixed today. The Dow down 81 points. The S&P down 3. The Nasdaq up 36. Volume on the big board, 3.5 billion shares. Tesla losing nearly $718 million in the second quarter, the biggest loss in the company's history. However, Tesla's stock right now soaring 11%, and after hours trading Elon Musk promising a stronger third, oh yes, and a stronger fourth quarter. A reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. The Federal Reserve today capped interest rates steady at 2%. Despite the booming Trump economy, the Fed expects to raise interest rates again in September and December. The president isn't going to like that, and many of us might not as well. We'll see how that goes. And a little girl, as I said earlier in the broadcast, melting hearts out in California, handing out burritos to firefighters battling a number of wildfires in California.
Look at his boots.
The girl's mother saying that her daughter just wanted to show support for the firefighters' hard work. And that's very sweet. And gratitude in order from all of us. We've had a little book sales competition going on among some of our favorite colleagues on the show, and we can now tell you how it's going. The Russia Hoax by Greg Jarrett has moved to #1 on the New York Times bestseller. Judge Jeanine is #1 right now and will be until the 12th when Greg takes over the first place. And Sebastian Gorka's Why We Fight and Sidney Powell's License to Lie are having a good run, and we can't wait to see how that fares over the next week. We're going to keep you posted with all of this going on. Both the judge and Greg are extraordinarily competitive, so it's going to be a fight. Up next, more abuse from the bench, the pro-illegal immigrant ruling. We'll have that for you here next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. One of the men accused of killing a U.S. Border Patrol agent appearing in federal court today, Osorio Arellano's, is said to have taken part in the 2010 murder of Brian Terry, whose death exposed the Obama administration's fast and furious gun-walking scandal. He won't face the death penalty, however, during his trial in September. Life sentence, the worst that can be brought against him. Mexico refuses to extradite suspects when capital punishment is on the line in this country. Joining us tonight from a Get Out the Vote rally taking place in her Nashville campaign headquarters, Tennessee gubernatorial candidate and Congresswoman Diane Black. She serves on the House Budget Committee as well as the House Ways and Means Committee. Great to have you with us, Congresswoman. Let's start with the
It's
primary.
great to be with you, Lou.
It's a crowded place. You've got the endorsement of Vice President Mike Pence. President Trump, he won it by a slight margin, the state of Tennessee, didn't he?
Vice President Trump? President Trump?
Yes.
No, he won Tennessee big. He won Tennessee big.
60%.
That's right.
I just find it stunning. So you're feeling pretty good, I would imagine, going into the election tomorrow.
We are. We've been across the entire state today. We've been all the way from the most eastern part of the state in the Tri-Cities up by Virginia, all the way down to Memphis. And we're right back here at our home spot right here with our headquarters here in Nashville. And we have felt that excitement and energy across the entire state. So we're energized going into the election tomorrow.
What's the biggest issue the Tennesseans are thinking about from your perspective? What most interests and concerns them?
You know, it is really interesting that immigration has been a top issue here for us here in the state. And of course, you know, I've worked with President Trump and Vice President Pence to make sure that we do all we can to protect our borders coming into our country. But it's also incumbent upon me as the next governor to make sure that our borders here in the state of Tennessee are also secure and that we don't have sanctuary cities. That's a big concern of the people here in Tennessee. And they also want to make sure that we don't give in-state tuition to our illegal immigrants. So these are big issues that are really one of the biggest things that we hear here in the state of Tennessee.
And Tennessee is sharing in what has been a remarkable turnaround in this country's economy under President Trump. Economically, this country is booming. Low unemployment, rising economic growth. I mean, we're at 4.1% for the second quarter and headed higher, it appears. This is the best of times for many Americans. How about in Tennessee, and how bright are the prospects for Republican candidates?
Well, Lou, I am very excited about the fact that we were able to work together with Vice President Pence and also President Trump to make sure that we got the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed, because we've seen now what that has done, and being right in the middle of that as the budget chairman was really quite an honor. We see here in the Middle Tennessee that there are more jobs open than there are people to fill them. The economy is booming, and of course we're a state that doesn't have a state income tax. People moving here in the Middle Tennessee area at 100 people a day. So Tennessee is a booming area, and we want to keep it that way. And as someone who believes that we keep taxes low, allow people to keep more of the money in their pocket, as we did in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that's only going to make it better and better for us right here in the state of Tennessee.
And the president today telling his attorney general that he should end the Mueller witch hunt. How do you feel about ending the witch hunt, shutting down the special counsel and firing Bob Mueller after more than 2 years of investigation that has turned up nothing?
That's exactly right, Lou. It has turned up nothing. And the collusion is not there. Nothing has been shown. We are wasting taxpayer dollars. We're wasting our time. Let's spend our time on something that we know is more important, like growing the economy and like border control and building the wall. Let's spend our time on things that really do make a difference. And I think it needs to end today.
And I assume that you, like most Republicans, support the contract to keep America great. Congresswoman, we appreciate it. Good luck tomorrow. Diane Blank.
Thank you, Lou.
That's it for us tonight. Join us tomorrow. Special 2-hour coverage of the president's rally in Pennsylvania.